The International Series continues with the Broncos and the Jets. In Florida, when you're looking at that game, who do you have your eye on?
It's a great week to start J.K. Dobbins, isn't it? He has just been dominating the groundwork there for the Broncos, and I don't think he's gotten enough credit because he leads the NFL in explosive runs right now. And he brings such a safe floor. He has either 100 rushing yards or a touchdown in every game this season. But I think this could be an upside game because not only have the Jets struggled against the run, they've allowed the 7th most rushing yards, but they gave up a ton of points, so the chance to get touchdowns is elevated, and game script could be on his side. So J.K. Dobbins is someone that I think is a strong start in Week 6.
One of the starts I'm not so sure on is Garrett Wilson, excuse me. Listen. Obviously, if you're playing in season-long fantasy and you used a high draft pick on Garrett Wilson, you're probably compelled to start him, except for extenuating circumstances. I'm sure somebody will hit me up on Twitter or Threads or whatever and be like, no, actually, okay, fine. That's fine. But the matchup, I don't like it because the Broncos have been very strong against opposing wide receivers this season. I was doing some other things when I was looking for people and take it to the rank. I started looking at the way the coverages work for the Broncos, and you're like, oh, this might be a play for Garrett Wilson. Then you're like, oh, wait, Patrick Surtain plays on this team, so I'm going to be very wary of Garrett Wilson.
The wildest thing I took away from what you just said is that you use Threads. For me,
you don't like Threads?
I tried it once. It wasn't for me.
How dare you?
I like Evan Engram as a sleeper this week, and I know he's been disappointed to this part in the season, also been banged up a little bit at times. Sean Payton, though, has expressed a desire to emphasize Engram more in the offense, and I know that sometimes we can't always take Sean Payton at his word, but if you look over the last couple of weeks, you're starting to see it in action. He had 6 total targets in weeks 1 and 2, 13 total targets in weeks 4 and 5, so it looks like Bo Nix is looking his direction more. On top of it, the Jets the last 2 weeks have sort of been beat up by the tight end position. They've given up the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends in that stretch and given up 4 touchdowns. So I don't know if Evan Engram has that kind of a day, but I think it's going to be better than what you have seen and probably a lot better than what we're getting out of most tight ends on a weekly basis. Of course, when you think of games in London, you probably think of the Jacksonville Jaguars because they've played quite a few of them over there. This week, they are back at home in Duval. Taking on the Seattle Seahawks.
I was just talking about Duval on Threads right now.
Oh, wow. Synergy. Look at how it all comes together. But anyway, Florio, if you're looking at this game between the Seahawks and the Jags, what are you paying attention to?
I would say beware of Kenneth Walker. Not a straight sit, but Charbonnet has outscored Walker in 3 of the 4 games they have played together. And in those 4 games, less than 12 fantasy points per game for Walker. Charbonnet is getting the goal line work and steady ground volume. That has transformed Walker into a big play-reliant flex option. Most weeks, I think you could expect somewhere from 10 to 12 fantasy points. Some weeks he'll hit a big play, maybe a long touchdown, and it'll be higher. Other weeks will be a little bit lower. That could be this week because the Jags have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. So, again, it depends on your options, but he is no longer a guy that you just set and forget.
Yeah, the Charbonnet-Walker split has been really frustrating, I think, for a lot of fantasy folks. On the other side of this, though, I say you can start Brian Thomas Jr., and it's been a few weeks since we have sort of felt this way, but even though the production has maybe been not what you wanted it to be, there's so many of the underlying metrics that are good. High route participation, 23% target share, nearly 40% of the air yards. If this sort of thing continues, at some point, he and Trevor Lawrence are going to connect. He's going to get some big plays, plus the Seahawks giving up chunk pass plays. We saw Emeka Egbuka, Ricky Pearsall have some big games against this defense. They're giving up nearly 11 air yards per target to wide receivers. So we'll see. Did the Jaguars find something on offense after that win over Kansas City last week? And can they keep it going against a pretty good defense in the Seattle Seahawks? We will stick in the NFC West where the Rams go cross-country to take on the Baltimore Ravens. And obviously a tough start for the Ravens, which we try to take advantage of in fantasy. And so for that end, I will tell you that Matthew Stafford is an absolute must-start this week. A little bit surprising because for a Sean McVay offense, the Rams throwing it more than they normally do, but Stafford has been on point. You see that, the 300 passing yards per game that he is averaging. The Ravens defense obviously is just dealing with a ton of injuries. They are giving up a lot of big plays in the passing game. They're ranked 31st against the pass so far this season, 13 passing touchdowns allowed. 3 different quarterbacks have had top 3 weekly finishes. 2 of those 3 quarterbacks finished as the QB1 overall. So Matthew Stafford absolutely needs to be in your lineups where you can get him.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think he is a must-play this week, which is why I also really like Davante Adams. He has gotten a lot of save volume, 8 or more targets in 4 or 5 games, but specifically, he is their red zone target. He leads the NFL in red zone targets. He is second in end zone targets, and this is a great week for that because the Ravens, they've allowed 10 red zone touchdowns to wide receivers. That is double every other team in the NFL. So his strength against their weakness, yeah, I think it is a great week to get Davante Adams in your fantasy lineup.
I have a Stafford Adams stack in one of my leagues. Looking forward to that one. Team with an interesting matchup, the San Francisco 49ers heading down to Tampa to take on the Buccaneers. And we know for the Bucs, we know no Mike Evans, but also no Chris Godwin, no Bucky Irving as well. So 3 big pieces missing in that Tampa offense. But Florio, how are you feeling about Baker Mayfield with all that?
Yeah, I don't care. It doesn't matter who's not there for the Bucs. As long as Baker's there, must-start option, especially this week against the 49ers. He is currently top 3 amongst quarterbacks in total fantasy points, top 5 in fantasy points per game. He leads all quarterbacks with 5 games with 17 or more fantasy points. So the floor is rock solid, but the ceiling is higher than ever now that we're seeing him run consistently even more. Like he started to do that last year. He's doing it even more now. And then lastly, sorry, Marcus, but the 49ers, since the Nick Bosa injury, have created pressure at the lowest rate in the NFL. So if you give Baker Mayfield time, I like his chances.
Yeah, pass rush has not been there for the Niners lately.
And one of the must-starts at the wide receiver position is Emeka Egbuka, a player that coming into this season, 2 rookies, actually I had 3 rookies that I highlighted coming into this season. Cam Scatterbu, Emeka Egbuka, and Colson Lovely. Don't worry about the third one. It doesn't matter. We're talking about Emeka Egbuka right now. 5 receiving touchdowns this season, the 3rd most fantasy points by a wide receiver through the first 5 career games in the Super Bowl era. And you know what? The connection with Baker Mayfield is there. It was almost immediate. And this Buccaneers team, this is one of the things that I think that we don't give enough credit to, how well the Buccaneers have been playing for the last number of years. As much as the NFL is up and down time and time again, this Buccaneers team just goes out there and wins, and Emeka Egbuka is just a product of that. Great organization they got down there, and obviously if you drafted Emeka Egbuka, you didn't draft him as one of your top 2 wide receivers, I'm assuming. But he is in your lineup each and every week.
He's just become a staple. He's a must-start at this point. Stick around where we'll be previewing a brand new quarterback, Joe Flacco, coming over from the Cleveland Browns. And as we take a look at this one, Bengals and Packers. Frank, what are you keeping an eye on here?
I'm going to look at Jordan Love, because Jordan Love is going to be sitting there looking across the field there and saying, like, I really lost to Joe Flacco a couple of weeks ago when he was a quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. I have got to go out there and get my comeuppance. So for me, Jordan Love is a must-start coming off the bye week for the Packers. The Bengals have allowed the 2nd most touchdown passes this season, the 4th most passing yards per game, and a lot of production of the quarterbacks. So Jordan Love is a must-start.
Yeah, I have him as a must-start as well. I think the same thing for Jamar Chase, and he's dealing with an illness, but if he plays for the Bengals, he plays for you. 29 fantasy points and a wide receiver 2 finish on the week last week. That's why you never bench Jamar Chase. And I know some of you were like, well, Joe Flacco's just getting here. I think Joe Flacco is smart enough to kind of understand this Bengals offense should operate like a Hey Arnold basketball team. Pass the ball to Tucker. I mean to Chase. But yeah, that's how this offense should work this week. Just Jamar Chase targets all the time.
Yeah, I think just stand back there and throw it up to number 1. You're going to be pretty good if that's what you're going to do this week. But we talked about this game. Let's get a little bit more into it. Time for our Next Gen Nugget with our own researcher, Next Gen Ken. His mother calls him Kendall. And so you heard Florio and Rank give their thoughts on this Bengals-Packers game. But, Kendall, you got a little bit more about that, don't you?
Yeah, I want to focus on Tucker Kraft this week, and he draws the Bengals, who have already allowed season highs to 3 different tight ends this season. First, Harold Fannin Jr., then T.J. Hawkinson, in this most recent week, Sam Laporta. Now, the eye-popping number here is that the Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season, but the reason why they've allowed the 2nd highest open target rate and the 2nd most yards after catch per reception to tight ends this season. Now, this lines up very well for Kraft and the Packers. They rank 3rd with 58.6% of their pass yards this season generated by yards after the catch. And Kraft leads all tight ends in the NFL with 10.1 yards after the catch per reception this season, a stat that he led tight ends last season as well. So I know it's a nasty business trying to project which Packers pass catcher is going to go off from week to week, but Kraft does lead the Packers in receptions and fantasy points since the start of last season. So with all of that information, I really don't know how you leave him out of your starting lineup this week.
Speaking of information, didn't I say that yesterday?
Yeah, but who do you think put those research notes on your cards on?
That's a good point. I'm going to go back to my comic book store where I dish out the insults rather than absorb them. Good job, Ken.
Cowboys heading down to Carolina to take on the Panthers. And look, Carolina coming off a nice win last week. The Cowboys looking like maybe they are finding some things as well. So we'll talk a little bit about this one. And I'm going to start it off with Tenaroa McMillan, who, when we talk about all the rookies so far this season, McMillan kind of has been lost in the shuffle a little bit, but is actually playing some really good football. 25% target share down there in Carolina, more than 40% of the air yards. And yeah, even though it's like the Cowboys defense might have come around a little bit last week, I'm still willing to take the chance on going against them. They've given up the most receiving yards and touchdowns to wideouts entering week 6. And we saw Garrett Wilson kind of have some late yards, late points there. I don't care when they happen. They can happen early, they can happen late. They still count the same. So if I can't have a chance, I'm going to try to slide McMillan into a spot somewhere in my lineup.
And it is going to be a revenge game for Rico Dowdle, who last week became the third running back in Carolina Panthers history to rush for more than 200 yards in a game. Nope, CMC was not one of them. Good luck finding. Go Google it. Actually, Ken gave it to me. It's D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart. But the Cowboys have allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. They've allowed the most receiving yards to the running back position. And one final note, rank you stick. Kendall, what are you writing here? I'm sorry. I wanted to give you credit for pulling that thing out. But now Rico Dowdle is an excellent start this week against this Cowboys defense.
Yeah, he told them to buckle up. So we'll see if he pays off on that coming up this week. We'll head down to South Beach for the Chargers and the Dolphins. And Rick, what do you got here?
I'm going to say you can go ahead and start the wee lad McConkey. I know a lot of people have watched as Quinton Johnson has taken over a bigger role in this offense, but Lad McConkey is still getting a lot of targets. He's still running a lot of his routes out of the slot. He had 2 end zone targets in week 5 after having none in the first 4 games of the season. He still has the highest target share amongst the wide receivers this season. And of course, the Dolphins have allowed the 9th most yards per targets to wide receivers this year. So for me, I know that it's been disappointing. I know a lot of us use expensive draft capital on Lad McConkey, but we still must continue to start him week in and week out.
Yeah, I think Lad and all the other Chargers receivers in play this week, which means I'm starting Justin Herbert in this one. And what I really love about Herbert is he's running more. A career-high 31 rush yards per game. He's already halfway to his career-high number in rushing yards. Plus, fantastic matchup. The Dolphins have allowed the 4th most rushing yards and most rushing touchdowns to quarterbacks. They've also allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the position. In fact, Bryce Young was the only quarterback to not finish top 5 against them this year. So I know it's been a little bit more down than we wanted for Justin Herbert, but this feels like a good week to get him in your starting lineup.
It's a really fun game on Sunday night. On top of it, pretty good uniform matchup as well. I'm looking at a sleeper, and it's Tyquan Thornton, who he had a couple big games early in the season. I didn't think it was going to be sustainable, but really has endured through the first 5 games for Kansas City. Now, he's only averaging 5 targets a game, which isn't particularly great, but he has proven to be the big downfield threat for Patrick Mahomes in this offense. 23.5 air yards per target, 3 receiving touchdowns, which actually leads the team right now. And going against a Lions defense giving up the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. There's the potential for this to be a score fest with both teams moving up and down the field. So a chance for Tyquan Thornton to make some big plays in this one.
For that reason, Marcus, I think Xavier Worthy is just a must-start option this week. He has seen at least 8 targets in every game since he's returned, and in that span, he is the most end zone targets, in the last 2 weeks. Plus, I agree with you. I think it could be a score fest, a very high-scoring game, one where the Chiefs could potentially be chasing points, and that's huge because the Lions, they're without their top 2 cornerbacks this week, so there's a chance for the Chiefs receivers to eat. Plus, Worthy stays in play after this week, but he becomes a lot less must-starty after Rashee Rice returns.
Yeah, curious how this offense works when Rashee Rice is back. For a little bit more on this game, and because it is the C block that gets us to Seize the Season, presented by Caesars Sportsbook. And According to Caesar Sportsbook, here are the most likely players to score the first touchdown during this week's Sunday night showdown between the Lions and the Chiefs. Jahmyr Gibbs, top of the list, followed by David Montgomery and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Then a couple of Chiefs after that, Kareem Hunt and Xavier Worthy with even odds there. Of those guys, or maybe somebody off menu, Florio, who are you keeping an eye on?
Not a single C name to pick to keep the alliteration going, but I'm going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs here. 5 touchdowns in his last 4 games. The Chiefs in that span have allowed 4 touchdowns, 2 running backs, and he has taken over this backfield. I know Montgomery still gets used near the goal line, but he is seeing so much volume. In fact, I don't think there's a run defense out there that could stop him. He's the only running back to have a real big fantasy day against the Browns. So I know Gibbs, you took him early for a reason. I think he has a big game this week.
We head to Indy, where the Colts taking on the Arizona Cardinals here in Week 6. And Rank, who are you paying attention to?
I'm going to go with Tyler Warren as a must start. There was a time years ago whenever the Arizona Cardinals were playing, you're like, oh, start your tight ends against the Cardinals. The Cardinals are still pretty generous against opposing tight ends, allowing the 9th most yards per target to tight ends this season. They've allowed them 5th most receiving yards per game to the position as well. But Tyler Warren has really emerged is one of the most consistent tight ends in fantasy football. He's had at least 11 fantasy points in 4 games this season. He is one of 3 tight ends who can claim that. 307 receiving yards is also the most amongst tight ends. So this is a must-start week in and week out.
Yeah, I love me some Tyler Warren. I also think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a good play this week. Not only have his yards climbed in 3 straight games, the Cardinals in recent weeks have been vocal about getting him the ball more. He spoke about this week about how this is a big game for him personally against his dad's former team. And I know we obviously want Kyler Murray to play, but even if he's out, Jacoby Brissett metric-wise is close and sometimes exceeds Murray over the recent seasons on passes to out-wide wide receivers and on deep passes. And that is what we want for Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think he is very much so in play this week.
Yeah, I just think they're using him in a different and better way, and I definitely like what I've seen in the last couple of weeks. Rivalry game in the AFC North. It's the Browns and the Steelers. And Florio, what you got?
I think you sit Jaylen Warren because last I checked, he is a running back and he's facing the Browns this week. The Browns have allowed the 2nd fewest rushing yards, 4th fewest receiving yards, and 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. They do not allow long runs. They've shut down some huge names at the running back position. Last season, Warren did not reach 75 yards in either game against him. And that's something that I think is a real fear. Coming off of that huge game he had in London, do we see Kenneth Gainwell a little bit more involved? So I know he's a little bit more option-based, but if you have another option, I think I would try to get away from Jaylen Warren.
I don't. At least on one of my teams, I have to start him. I got David Njoku as kind of a sleeper. I know it's sort of a borderline sleeper call. Either way, I think he should be in your lineup this week. What we saw from Dylan Gabriel in his first start, that he went very tight end heavy. About 40% of his targets were split between David Njoku and Harold Fannin. 9 of them going to Njoku there. They just like getting him in open spaces in the middle of the field. He presents a big, sure-handed target for the young quarterback. And the Steelers sort of mid against tight ends this year, so I think there's an opportunity if Gabriel, especially if he gets pressure from that Steelers front, to get the ball out quickly to David Njoku. The Tennessee Titans heading to Vegas to take on the Raiders. And I'm going to say a thing that I don't think we've been able to say all year. Start Calvin Ridley. It has been a struggle for Ridley in the Titans passing game so far this season, but finally had his first big game of the year last week. Week 5, he had 131 receiving yards. In weeks 1 through 4, he had a total of 141, so very nearly doubled his season total in one game. Season high 10 targets, 5 receptions, going against the Raiders, who have a bottom 10 pass defense. 2nd most receptions allowed to wideouts entering the week, giving up a ton of fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So it feels like, look, I don't know that they've found something necessarily with Calvin Ridley, but it does feel like the matchup lends itself to him backing up good games.
You know, that's very useful information. I don't think it's useful to come out and say that Ashton Jeanty needs to be started each and every week. You kind of know that. But a couple of things I wanted to highlight here is during this week, Pete Carroll seemingly threw Chip Kelly under the bus when talking about Geno Smith, where he's like, Yeah, Geno's not calling the plays. I'm like, yeah, but Geno's actually the guy throwing it to the dudes in the other jerseys. But I also want to point out what a great a matchup it is against the Tennessee Titans. We kind of overlook when we're seeking out these when we're seeking out these matchups that are really working in favor of our opposing running backs. The Tennessee Titans have allowed the most scrimmage touchdowns to running backs this season with 9. Ashton Jeanty, of course, recently had a 3-touchdown game against the Chicago Bears. The Titans have allowed the 4th most rushing yards per game this season. Now, obviously, this works out because you were starting Ashton Jeanty anyways, but as we're starting to figure out streaming running backs and things of that nature, remember, the Tennessee Titans is going to be a favorable matchup to running backs moving forward, and they have been involved with some trade rumors too, so they could be shipping off some of their defensive linemen, so something to keep an eye on moving forward with the Tennessee Titans.
This could be a sneaky good fantasy matchup because neither of these defenses are particularly very good. The Saints and the Patriots. Florio, what do you like here?
Patriots running backs, right? Because the issue so far this year had been they were using 3. We could navigate 2, something you say a lot, Marcus, but 3 makes it murky. And unfortunately, with Antonio Gibson out now the rest of the way, that leads to, and I do expect Ramondre Stevenson to be the lead back. I'm curious as who Mike Vrabel's going to blame this week if he fumbles. Maybe it's the ball boy's turn. But I think more work is in favor for Travion Henderson as well. And he needs to be a little bit better, but give him some work on the outside where he has excelled. Maybe he gets in a rhythm now with more touches. I just also love the matchup. Saints are in the top 5 in targets and rush attempts allowed to running backs. They've struggled against each. So I think both are in play as flex options, and maybe they can work their way up a little bit better because they do have a favorable schedule coming up.
And it wouldn't be the first time somebody in the Patriots organization blamed the ball boy.
I'm going on the other side. I'm telling you can start Juwan Johnson. I'm going back to that well again. I know the last couple of weeks we've seen him have a drop-off in targets, but I think this is a good matchup for him. The Patriots, the top 5 most favorable matchup for tight ends this season. The last couple of weeks, they have really been torched by the position. 18 catches, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns allowed to tight ends. The only thing we have to avoid, there was a lot of Taysom Hill nonsense last week. Let's avoid some of this Taysom Hill nonsense this week. And if he can do that, then I think Juwan Johnson could have a good game against the New England Patriots.